He walked in with his fiancée, and walked out realizing the children he denied 6 years ago were sitting right in front of him. Max Warren had always believed that certainty was the greatest form of strength. At 34, he was a man who trusted facts, logic, and decisions that left no room for doubt. His rise to the position of CEO had not been accidental. It was built on discipline, ambition, and the ability to cut away anything that threatened his carefully structured life. Emotions, in his world, were something to be managed, not followed. 6 years earlier, he had been certain as well. When Emma stood in front of him, pale and trembling, and told him she was pregnant, Max did not hear fear in her voice. He heard danger. His company was on the brink of a major expansion, his reputation fragile, his future mapped out with precision. A child did not fit into that plan. He convinced himself that she was lying, that she wanted to trap him, that love had turned into manipulation. He spoke harshly, accused her of using him, and walked away before she could finish explaining. He never looked back, and when she disappeared from his life completely, he took it as proof that he had been right. Now, 6 years later, Max was sitting on the open veranda of an elite restaurant overlooking the river, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, the evening breeze carrying the scent of summer and expensive wine. Across from him sat Victoria, his fiancée, elegant and sharp-eyed, her dark hair styled flawlessly, her smile calculated and confident. She fit his life perfectly. She knew how to behave at events, how to speak to investors, how to never ask questions that might slow him down. This evening was supposed to be simple. A quiet dinner before an upcoming engagement party, another step toward a future that looked impressive from the outside. Max scanned the menu absent-mindedly while Victoria spoke about wedding venues and guest lists, her voice smooth but impatient, as if she were already bored with the details of a celebration she believed inevitable. Then Max looked up. At a table near the edge of the veranda sat a woman he had not seen in 6 years, yet recognized instantly. Emma's hair was lighter than he remembered, her posture calmer, her expression no longer marked by uncertainty. She looked older, not in years, but in depth, as if life had forced her to grow in ways he never had to. And beside her sat 2 boys. They were identical. Both had blonde, slightly wavy hair that caught the evening light, both had clear blue eyes that were painfully familiar, both were leaning toward her as they spoke, competing for her attention with effortless affection. One laughed openly, the other watched more quietly, but their movements mirrored each other so naturally it felt unsettling. Max felt the air leave his lungs. The world around him continued as if nothing had happened. Glasses clinked, people laughed, waiters moved between tables. Victoria was still talking, her words flowing without pause, but Max no longer heard her. His entire focus was locked on the scene unfolding a few meters away. Emma smiled at the boys, reaching out to adjust one of their collars, her touch instinctive and gentle. The boys responded with trust so complete it made something inside Max twist painfully. He did not need numbers, dates, or explanations. The truth hit him with a clarity he had never experienced before. These were not someone else's children. They were his. His chest tightened, not with anger, but with a sudden, overwhelming sense of loss. 6 years collapsed into a single moment, and with them disappeared the version of the past he had invented to justify his choices. For the first time since the night he walked away from Emma, doubt crept into his certainty, quiet but devastating. Victoria noticed his silence and followed his gaze, her expression darkening when she saw where he was looking. "Max," she said sharply, irritation cutting through her composed tone. "Are you listening to me?" He didn't answer. Because for the first time in his life, Max Warren understood that the truth he had rejected 6 years ago had not disappeared. It had simply grown, lived, and waited, and now it was sitting in front of him, impossible to ignore. Max did not remember pushing his chair back, but suddenly he was standing. The movement was abrupt enough that Victoria stopped mid-sentence, her irritation flashing openly now as she looked up at him. He barely registered her expression. His attention was fixed entirely on the distant table, on Emma and the two boys who were now sharing a dessert, their heads bent close together in quiet concentration. "Where are you going?" Victoria asked sharply, lowering her voice but not her anger. "I'll be back," Max said automatically, though he had no idea whether it was true. He walked across the veranda with measured steps that did not match the chaos in his mind. Every instinct told him to stop, to turn around, to return to the safety of the life he understood. But another force, stronger and far more unsettling, pushed him forward. The closer he came, the more undeniable the resemblance became. It was in the shape of the boys' noses, the slight crease between their brows when they focused, the familiar way one of them tilted his head while listening. Emma sensed him before she saw him. Her smile faded, replaced by a stillness that spoke of recognition and readiness. She looked up slowly, her blue eyes meeting his with a calm that unsettled him far more than anger ever could. "Max," she said, not loudly, but clearly. The boys turned at the sound of his name, their gazes shifting to him with open curiosity. One of them leaned closer to Emma instinctively, while the other studied Max without fear, his expression thoughtful and serious. For a moment, no one spoke. "I didn't know," Max said finally, the words falling flat even to his own ears. They sounded insufficient, almost meaningless, against the weight of what stood between them. Emma nodded slightly, as if she had expected nothing more. "I figured you wouldn't." His eyes dropped to the boys again. "How old are they?" "6, Emma answered. "Both of them?" The number landed with brutal precision. 6 years. The exact length of time since he had walked away, convinced that cutting her out of his life had solved everything. He felt a wave of nausea roll through him as memory after memory rearranged itself in light of that truth. "They're twins," Max said quietly, not as a question. "Yes," Emma replied. "Lucas and Owen." The boys exchanged a glance, sensing the tension, then looked back at Max. Lucas, the more reserved of the two, frowned slightly. "Mom," he asked, his voice calm but alert, "who is that man?" Emma rested a hand gently on his shoulder. "Someone I used to know," she said. Max flinched, though he had no right to. He knelt slowly to bring himself to their level, careful not to invade their space. "Hi," he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "I'm Max." Owen smiled without hesitation. "I'm Owen," he said cheerfully. "And that's my brother." Lucas did not smile. He studied Max closely, as if measuring something he did not yet understand. Before Max could respond, a sharp sound of heels approached behind him. Victoria had followed, her posture rigid, her expression openly hostile. "So this is where you disappeared to," she said coldly, her eyes moving from Emma to the boys and back again. "Unbelievable." Emma rose slowly from her chair, positioning herself between Victoria and the children without a word. "Please don't raise your voice," she said calmly. "You're upsetting them." Victoria scoffed. "Oh, I'm the problem now?" She turned to Max, her eyes blazing. "You didn't tell me about this." "There was nothing to tell," Max said quietly, not taking his eyes off Emma. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Victoria laughed sharply, the sound brittle. "So that's it? You see her and suddenly your past comes crawling back." Emma met her gaze without flinching. "Your issue isn't with me," she said evenly. "And certainly not with my children." The emphasis was deliberate. Max felt something inside him shift irrevocably. For the first time, he saw the situation not as a confrontation between two women, but as a test of the man he chose to be. He straightened slowly. "Victoria," he said, his voice firm, "you should go back to the table." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Excuse me?" "I'll talk to you later," he continued. "Not here." Silence stretched between them. Victoria's face hardened, pride wounded beyond repair. Without another word, she turned sharply and walked away, her heels striking the floor like punctuation marks on a sentence that had just ended. Max turned back to Emma, his chest tight. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," he said. I didn't know." "I know," Emma replied. "But not knowing doesn't change what happened." The boys watched them quietly now, sensing the seriousness beneath the conversation. Owen reached for Emma's hand, while Lucas kept his eyes fixed on Max, unreadable. "I'm not asking for anything tonight," Max said after a pause. "I just needed to see you. To see them." Emma studied him carefully, searching for something beneath the shock and regret. Finally, she nodded once. "That's enough for today," she said. "They're tired." Max stood slowly, his legs unsteady. "May I see them again?" Emma hesitated, then answered honestly. "We'll see." It was not permission. It was not refusal. But for Max, it was the first opening he had been given in 6 years. Max returned to his table only long enough to collect his jacket. Victoria was already gone, her chair pushed back sharply, her wine untouched. The space she left behind felt cold and final, but Max did not follow her. For the first time, the loss of a carefully planned future did not frighten him. What unsettled him far more was the weight of the present pressing down on his chest. He stepped out of the restaurant into the warm evening air, walking without direction until the noise of the street softened his thoughts. The image of the twins replayed relentlessly in his mind. The way Owen smiled without hesitation. The way Lucas watched him with guarded intensity. Two different temperaments, yet bound by the same unmistakable resemblance that tied them to him in ways no denial could undo. Back in his apartment, Max stood in the dark for a long time, the city lights bleeding through the windows. He loosened his tie, then removed it entirely, dropping it onto the counter as if shedding something constrictive. For years, he had believed that clarity meant certainty, that doubt was a weakness to be eliminated. Now doubt was all he had, and it was reshaping everything he thought he knew. Sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, it was fragmented and restless, filled with half-formed memories of Emma standing in front of him years ago, her voice steady despite her fear. He realized, with a painful clarity, how selectively he had remembered that night. He had focused on his own anger, his own sense of betrayal, while ignoring the quiet resolve in her eyes. She had not been manipulative. She had been terrified and alone. By morning, his certainty had crumbled completely. Max cancelled his meetings without explanation. His assistant protested briefly, unused to deviation from routine, but he ended the call quickly. For once, the company could function without him. There were things no boardroom decision could resolve. He spent the day replaying timelines, dates, conversations, reconstructing the past with brutal honesty. Emma had disappeared shortly after he walked away. He had taken that as confirmation of his assumptions, never questioning whether her silence was an act of survival rather than guilt. The truth had existed all along, but it required him to ask questions he had never been willing to ask. That afternoon, he found himself standing outside the restaurant again, staring at the empty veranda. The table where Emma had sat was vacant now, the scene reduced to memory. He wondered how many times she had passed places they once shared, carrying their children, while he moved forward untouched, convinced he had escaped responsibility. The realization left him nauseous. Late that evening, Max did something he had avoided for years. He searched for Emma's name, not through professional channels, but cautiously, respectfully. It did not take long. She had not hidden. She simply had not existed in his world anymore. Her profile was minimal. No photos of the children. No public declarations. Just enough information to confirm what he already knew. She had built a life without him, not out of spite, but necessity. Max typed and deleted a message more times than he could count. Every version sounded inadequate. Finally, he wrote something simple. "I'm not asking for explanations. I just want to talk, when and if you're ready." He stared at the screen for a long time before sending it. The reply came an hour later. "Tomorrow. Afternoon. The park near the river. 1 hour." There were no pleasantries. No emotion. Just boundaries. Max read the message again and again, feeling something unfamiliar settle into his chest. It was not relief. It was accountability. The next day could not be managed, negotiated, or controlled. Whatever awaited him at that park would demand something entirely different from him. Not authority. Not certainty. Presence. And for the first time since he had walked away 6 years ago, Max understood that showing up would cost him far more than leaving ever had. The park near the river was quieter than Max expected when he arrived the next afternoon. The air carried the scent of water and fresh grass, and the steady movement of the river created a calm rhythm that stood in sharp contrast to the tension building inside him. He came early again, not because he wanted to rush the moment, but because waiting felt like the only thing he could do right now without making another mistake. He chose a bench beneath a tree and sat down, forcing himself to breathe slowly, to let the sounds around him anchor him in the present. Children played in the distance, their laughter drifting across the open space. Every sound seemed amplified, every movement significant. Max checked his phone once, then slipped it back into his pocket, determined not to hide behind it. When Emma appeared, walking along the path toward him, he stood immediately. She was holding the boy's hands this time, one on each side, moving at their pace rather than her own. Lucas walked with careful attention to where he placed his feet, while Owen swung their joined hands lightly, humming to himself. Seeing them like this, grounded and confident, Max felt the familiar tightening in his chest return. Emma stopped a few steps away from him. She did not smile, but her expression was not cold either. It was neutral, composed, protective. She released the boy's hands only when they reached the bench, guiding them to sit while she remained standing. "This is Lucas," she said calmly, resting a hand on the shoulder of the quieter boy. "And this is Owen." "I remember," Max said softly. "Thank you for coming." "I said 1 hour," Emma replied. "That hasn't changed." "I understand," he said. "I'm not here to push." The boys looked at him openly now, curiosity winning over caution. Owen tilted his head slightly. "You were at the restaurant," he said matter-of-factly. "Yes," Max answered, lowering himself to sit on the bench across from them. "I was." Lucas studied him carefully, his gaze sharp and thoughtful. "Mom says you used to know each other." "We did," Max replied. "A long time ago." There was a pause, filled only by the sound of the river. Max resisted the urge to fill it with explanations or apologies. He had learned enough already to understand that words came last, not first. Emma finally sat beside the boys, positioning herself subtly between them and Max, not in hostility, but in instinct. "They know you're their father," she said quietly. I didn't hide that from them. The words hit him harder than he expected. And what did you tell them? He asked. That you weren't ready to be in their lives, Emma replied honestly. And that it had nothing to do with them. Max nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that truth. That was generous of you, he said. It was necessary, she answered. They deserve to grow up without thinking they weren't wanted. Owen frowned slightly, processing the conversation in his own way. So you didn't know about us? He asked. No, Max said gently. I didn't know. And that's on me. Lucas's eyes narrowed just a little. Why didn't you ask? The simplicity of the question left Max without defenses. He met Lucas's gaze directly. Because I was wrong, he said. And because I was afraid of hearing something that would change my life. Emma watched him closely, measuring the honesty in his tone rather than the words themselves. For the first time, she did not interrupt. I can't change what I did, Max continued, keeping his voice steady. But I want to take responsibility for what I didn't do. If you allow me. Emma exhaled slowly. Responsibility doesn't start with wanting, she said. It starts with patience. I have time, Max replied. As much as it takes. The boys shifted, the tension easing slightly as the adult spoke in calmer tones. Owen leaned closer to Emma, resting against her side, while Lucas remained alert, still watching Max with cautious interest. After a while, Emma checked her watch. That's enough for today, she said. Max stood immediately, respecting the boundary without protest. Thank you, he said. For meeting me. Emma hesitated, then nodded once. We'll see how things go, she said. Slowly. As she walked away with the boys, Max stayed where he was, watching them disappear down the path. He did not follow. He did not call out. For once, restraint felt like progress. Sitting alone on the bench, Max understood something he had never grasped before. Redemption was not about being forgiven quickly or completely. It was about accepting limits, honoring boundaries, and showing up again without expectation. And for the first time in 6 years, he was ready to do exactly that. The days that followed passed with a strange mixture of restraint and intensity. Max did not contact Emma again right away, even though every instinct urged him to do so. He understood now that urgency was his old habit, one that had already cost him too much. Instead, he allowed the silence to exist, using it not as a space to fill, but as a test of whether he could finally respect boundaries without feeling entitled to immediate results. He returned to work, but everything felt different. Meetings that once demanded his full attention now seemed hollow, their urgency artificial. He found himself watching the clock in a way he never had before, not because he wanted the day to end, but because he wanted time itself to slow down. The image of Lucas and Owen sitting on that bench replayed in his mind constantly, their faces serious and observant, far older in awareness than their years suggested. One evening, unable to remain still any longer, Max drove through the neighborhood near Emma's apartment, careful not to pass her building directly. He told himself he was only trying to understand the environment his sons were growing up in, but the truth was more complicated. He was confronting the reality that life had moved forward without him, quietly and successfully, and that realization carried both relief and regret. When Emma finally reached out again, it was 3 days later. The message was brief and precise. Tomorrow. Same park. 30 minutes. Max read it twice, then once more, feeling something steady replace the nervous anticipation he had felt before. He replied with a single word. Okay. The next afternoon, he arrived exactly on time. Emma was already there with the boys, sitting on the grass this time instead of a bench. Lucas was drawing lines in the dirt with a stick, focused and methodical, while Owen chased a butterfly with dramatic enthusiasm. Emma watched them with quiet attentiveness, her posture relaxed but alert. Max approached slowly and stopped a few steps away, waiting. Emma looked up and nodded once, granting permission without words. He sat down on the grass at a respectful distance, mirroring their level rather than positioning himself above it. Owen noticed him first. "You came again," he said, sounding pleased rather than surprised. "Yes," Max replied. "I said I would." Lucas glanced up briefly, then returned to his drawing. "People say that a lot," he said quietly. Max absorbed the comment without defensiveness. "I know," he answered. "That's why I came back." Emma observed the exchange closely, her expression unreadable. "We're staying a short time today," she said. "I want to see how they feel." "That's fair," Max replied. For several minutes, nothing happened. Max did not try to lead the interaction or insert himself into the boys' play. He watched, commented only when spoken to, and allowed silence to do its work. Gradually, Owen wandered closer, holding up a leaf as if presenting evidence of something important. "Do you think this one is better than the other one?" he asked seriously. Max leaned forward slightly, considering the leaf with equal seriousness. "I think it depends on what you need it for," he said. Owen smiled, satisfied, and sat down near him. Lucas watched this from the corner of his eye, his skepticism softening just enough to become curiosity. Emma exhaled quietly, a tension easing that Max had not known was there. After a while, she spoke again. "They don't need a perfect father," she said, her voice calm but firm. "They need someone who doesn't disappear when things get uncomfortable." Max nodded. "I won't," he said. "And if I ever do something wrong, I won't pretend it didn't happen." Emma studied him for a long moment. "That matters more than you think." When it was time to leave, Owen ran ahead toward the path, while Lucas lingered for a second. He looked at Max carefully, then asked, "Are you coming next time too?" Max did not answer immediately. He looked at Emma first, then back at Lucas. "If your mom says it's okay," he replied. Emma met his gaze and nodded once. "We'll talk," she said. It was not trust yet, but it was movement. As Max watched them walk away, he felt no rush to follow, no need to push the moment further. For the first time in his life, he understood that presence was not about proximity, but reliability. And as he stood there, alone in the park that had become the center of everything, he knew that whatever came next would be built slowly, deliberately, and honestly. For the first time, that felt exactly right. Time began to stretch in unfamiliar ways for Max. Days no longer blurred together as they once had, measured only by deadlines and achievements. Instead, they were marked by smaller moments that carried a weight he had never learned to recognize before. A message from Emma confirming another meeting. A brief memory of Lucas's careful gaze. Owen's easy laughter echoing in his mind long after it faded in reality. Their meetings continued, always planned, always limited, always on Emma's terms. Sometimes they met at the park, other times at a quiet cafe where the boys could sit with coloring books while adults spoke in low voices. Max never complained about the restrictions. He treated them as boundaries that needed protection, not obstacles to overcome. Each meeting felt like an examination he did not prepare for with speeches, only with presence. Gradually, Emma began to speak more during those hours. Not about the past at first, but about the boys. About Lucas's sensitivity, how he noticed everything and asked questions long after others had moved on. About Owen's boundless energy, his ability to forgive small disappointments quickly and move forward without bitterness. Max listened carefully, absorbing these details as if learning a language he should have known from the beginning. One afternoon, as rain forced them to sit beneath a covered pavilion, Emma finally allowed the conversation to drift backward. "The night you left," she said quietly, watching the boys jump in puddles nearby, "I didn't cry until you were gone." Max closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, forcing himself to remain fully present. "I was cruel," he said. "And certain. That was the worst part." "I wasn't asking you to fix anything," Emma continued. "I was asking you to stay long enough to listen." He nodded slowly. "I didn't know how." "That doesn't make it hurt less," she said, not accusing, just stating a fact. The honesty between them felt fragile but necessary. Max understood now that remorse did not erase damage. It only acknowledged it. And acknowledgement, while painful, was the beginning of something real. That evening, after one of their shorter meetings, Emma surprised him. "Would you like to come to their school event next week?" she asked. Max looked at her carefully, unsure if he had heard correctly. "As what?" he asked. "As someone who knows them," Emma replied. "Not as their father." "Not yet." "I'd like that," he said immediately, then added more quietly, "if you're sure." She nodded. "I am." The event was simple. A small performance in a school gym, children standing in uneven lines, voices loud and uncoordinated. Max sat in the back, resisting the urge to stand out, clapping when everyone else clapped, smiling when the boys spotted Emma in the crowd and waved enthusiastically. When Lucas's eyes briefly met his, there was no smile, but there was recognition. That alone felt monumental. Afterward, Owen ran over first, excited and breathless. "Did you see us?" he asked. "I did," Max replied. "You were amazing." Lucas approached more slowly, then nodded once. "We didn't mess up," he said. "No," Max agreed. "You didn't." Emma watched the exchange with something like guarded relief. Later, as they walked out together, she said quietly, "You handled that well." "I'm trying," Max answered honestly. That night, alone in his apartment, Max confronted a truth that unsettled him deeply. He was no longer afraid of responsibility. He was afraid of failing at it. Afraid that one wrong step would undo everything he had begun to build. But unlike before, that fear did not push him to retreat. It pushed him to stay alert, careful, and accountable. For the first time, Max understood that love was not something you claimed. It was something you were trusted with. And trust, once broken, demanded patience measured not in days or months, but in consistency. In showing up again, even when nothing seemed to change. Even when progress was invisible. Especially then. As he turned off the lights and prepared for sleep, Max accepted that there would be no moment when everything suddenly felt resolved. No clear line marking forgiveness or redemption. There would only be tomorrow, and the choice to meet it honestly. And this time, he was ready to make that choice. The shift came quietly, without announcements or dramatic gestures, which made it all the more unsettling for Max. One morning, Emma called him instead of sending a message. Her voice on the line was calm but tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from holding everything together for too long without help. "Can you watch the boys for an hour this afternoon?" she asked. "I have an appointment I can't move." Max did not hesitate, though his heart began to race. "Yes," he said. "Of course. Tell me what they need." "They'll be at the apartment," Emma replied. "I'll be back before dinner." When he arrived, the space felt intimate in a way that made him acutely aware of his place in it. The apartment was modest but warm, filled with small signs of a carefully structured life. Shoes neatly lined by the door. Drawings taped to the refrigerator. A stack of children's books arranged by height rather than theme. Max took it all in silently, recognizing how much effort it took to create stability without ever expecting recognition for it. Emma knelt in front of the boys, giving instructions with practiced clarity. "I'll be back soon," she said. "Listen to Max. He knows what you can and can't do." Owen nodded enthusiastically. Lucas glanced at Max, then back at his mother. "You're coming back," he said. "I am," Emma replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I always do." When the door closed behind her, the apartment seemed to hold its breath. Max sat on the couch, unsure how to begin. Owen solved the problem for him by climbing onto the cushion beside him, already flipping through a book. "Can you read?" Owen asked. "Yes," Max said, smiling despite the knot in his chest. "I can read." They settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Max read slowly, adjusting his pace to Owen's interruptions and Lucas's occasional corrections. When the book ended, they moved on to building a tower from wooden blocks, a task Lucas approached with careful precision while Owen preferred speed over stability. When the tower collapsed, Owen laughed and Lucas sighed, already planning how to improve it next time. Max watched them, struck by how clearly their personalities revealed themselves in the smallest moments. He realized then how much he had missed, not just milestones, but this quiet, ordinary magic that defined real life. Later, while Owen napped on the couch, Lucas sat across from Max at the table, drawing intently. "Do you live alone?" Lucas asked suddenly. "Yes," Max replied. "Do you like it?" the boy asked, not looking up. Max considered the question carefully. "I used to," he said. "Now I'm not sure." Lucas nodded, as if that answer made sense. "Mom says being alone too long makes people forget how to talk," he said. Max felt something tighten in his throat. "Your mom is very wise." When Emma returned, she paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Owen asleep under a blanket. Lucas drawing beside Max. The tension in her shoulders eased visibly. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," Max replied. He woke up once, but went back to sleep. Emma smiled faintly. "Thank you." That evening, as they stood near the door, Emma hesitated. "They like you," she said quietly. "That matters to me." "I don't take that lightly," Max replied. Later that night, Max sat alone in his car, unable to start the engine right away. He realized that the fear he had carried for months had shifted. It was no longer about whether he deserved a place in their lives, but whether he could live up to the responsibility he had been offered. For the first time, that responsibility did not feel like a threat. It felt like a privilege. And Max understood that this was the point of no return. Not because Emma had forgiven him completely, or because the boys trusted him without reservation, but because he had crossed an internal line. He could no longer imagine choosing a life that excluded them. Whatever came next would be complicated, uncertain, and demanding. But for the first time, complexity did not scare him. It grounded him. Spring arrived slowly, almost cautiously, as if the world itself needed time to adjust to the changes unfolding between them. The days grew longer, light lingering in the evenings, and with it came a sense of movement that no longer felt rushed or forced. Max's presence in the boys' lives had become expected rather than questioned, woven quietly into their routine through consistency rather than declaration. He no longer needed invitations for every meeting. Emma would text him simple updates now, asking if he could join them for dinner, or pick the boys up from school when she was running late. Each request carried trust, and Max treated that trust with care bordering on reverence. He never complained, never pushed for more than was offered, and never disappeared, even when work demanded sacrifices he once would have considered impossible. The defining moment came on an ordinary afternoon. Lucas and Owen were playing in the living room, arguing gently over which game to choose, while Emma stood in the kitchen, sorting through paperwork. Max sat at the table, reviewing documents for work he had postponed until after dinner. The scene was mundane, almost boring, and yet it struck him with overwhelming clarity. This was what he had walked away from 6 years ago without understanding its value. Lucas approached him quietly, holding a piece of paper. "Mom says you're good with numbers," he said. Max smiled. "I am." "Can you help me?" Lucas asked. Max pushed the papers aside immediately. "Of course." Emma watched from the doorway as Max leaned closer, explaining patiently, never raising his voice, never showing frustration. Owen joined in halfway through, asking unrelated questions that Max answered with equal seriousness. There was no performance in his behavior, no attempt to impress. He was simply there. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Emma poured 2 cups of tea and sat across from Max. The apartment was quiet, wrapped in the soft hum of the city beyond the windows. "I need to say something," she began. Max set his cup down, giving her his full attention. "I spent a long time believing I would always have to do everything alone," Emma said. "Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't trust anyone not to leave when it became difficult." Max nodded slowly. "I gave you every reason to believe that." "Yes," she agreed. "But you didn't this time." The words hung between them, fragile and heavy with meaning. "I'm not saying everything is forgiven," Emma continued. "Some things take longer than that. But I see who you are now. And more importantly, they do." She glanced toward the boys' room. Max felt something shift deep within him, something final and grounding. "I won't leave," he said. "Not when it's hard. Not when it's uncomfortable. Not ever." Emma studied his face, searching not for certainty, but for truth. When she found it, her shoulders relaxed in a way he had never seen before. Weeks later, they returned to the same restaurant where everything had fallen apart. This time, there was no tension, no unspoken confrontation waiting in the shadows. The 4 of them sat together on the veranda, Lucas carefully reading the menu, Owen insisting on ordering dessert first, Emma laughing softly as she tried to keep peace between them. Max watched the scene unfold with quiet disbelief. He had arrived at this place once with a woman who fit his image of success and left with nothing but certainty. Now he sat here with a family he had nearly lost, understanding that real success had nothing to do with control or appearances. As the sun set, casting warm light across the table, Owen leaned against him without hesitation, and Lucas followed a moment later, pretending it was accidental. Max didn't move. He simply stayed. Emma met his eyes across the table, and for the first time, she smiled without reservation. Max had not been given a second chance. He had earned one. Not through wealth or power, but through patience, humility, and the courage to remain when it would have been easier to walk away. 6 years ago, he had rejected the truth out of fear. Now, he chose it, fully, finally, and without hesitation. And this time, he was exactly where he belonged.
When I wrote this story, I wanted to show that the hardest mistakes are often born not from cruelty, but from fear. Fear of losing control, a familiar life, or oneself. But truth and responsibility cannot be escaped, they always catch up. For me, this story is not about money, but about choice and redemption. Max isn't a perfect hero. He's someone who learned step by step how to take responsibility and stay when it matters. Emma is the kind of woman who survives quietly, protects her children, and doesn't forgive with words, only with time. And the boys are the purest truth in the story. They don't need grand promises, they need consistency and love. The ending is happy, not because everything becomes perfect, but because each character grows into what really matters: family, trust, and a chance to begin again. This is a fictional story written by me. I create original stories to explore emotional and moral situations people can relate to. This story is not based on real people. Thank you for listening and reflecting with me.